And before we get into some of the leading indicators on and some of the key, regional Fed data, we just wanted to highlight the share of job postings on Indeed advertising remote work and how it's something that's going to be sticky. And again, 10% was a big piece of it, and now it's kind of flatlined and averaged out. And that's, I think, the biggest piece that we continue to see is how much more common this is going to become, in the sense of, you're seeing that kind of steady 8%, 8.5%. And when you look at the flexible schedule and how that's been adopted, and how about 40% of office space is empty on a day-to-day basis, and that's just because of, again, on average, and that's just because of all of the work from home as well as flexible schedule and people not commuting. So now when we start looking at some of that activity going in the Kansas City service side, you can see that there was a nice bounce back to 1, so it's back into expansion. On the Richmond Fed side, it was expected to be -5, came in at -16. And it's all a matter of balancing. Like Philly was better than expected, Empire was worse. Kansas City was slightly better than expected, Richmond was worse. It's just the backdrop and the direction. So when you look at Fed Kansas City, for an example, it's a lower high. And that's a problem. And that just, again, continues that trend lower. Richmond Fed, something similar. You get that continuous trend. And last month, it bounced back to positive. Now it's back negative. And it's just a matter of looking at the general trend and what is beneath the data helping drive that. When you look at Richmond Fed, number of employees is contracting. But again, the trend has been down, and it's not going to continue down, but it's going to bounce around in a contractionary standpoint. Expected new orders did get better. So that is a positive, but look at the levels in terms of where it is. It's equivalent high in terms of where it's been, but you have this waffling back and forth because they may have gotten a slew of new orders in, so they expect more new orders. They may have not gotten the new orders they expected, so they felt worse. So this is where we're just kind of bouncing around this stagnating component. And when you blend it all together, which I think I have a chart on, you can see that the trend is going to continue to be to the downside. The manufacturing implied index fell to -16 versus the estimate of -5. New orders stuck in deep contraction. Shipments sank. CapEx fell further into contraction. So when you look at, again, some of the new order side, again, bouncing back and forth because the expected new orders bounced, but then the actual new orders were down. So again, that's where you kind of get that diffuse index and some of those different pieces, what's going to play out first. Then when you look at Chicago PMI, fell to 43.6 versus the estimate of 45.5, and in which was 44.3 in Jan. New orders fell at slower pace, still contracting. Prices paid rose at a slower pace, but still expanding. But that's the problem point. Supplier deliveries rose at a faster pace, still expanding, and employment fell at a faster pace, still contracting. Dallas, on the other hand, saw something similar. Survey was for -9.3, came in at -13.5. And that's why when you start blending these together, the negative is outweighing some of the positive, and you're seeing some of those continuous problems crop up. New orders maintain their contraction, being in -13.2. Input prices actually turned back up. And this is what, again, we've been saying, is that we expect more slowdowns, but we don't expect prices to really drop aggressively. And that's, I think, some of the problem points that we continue to see. Divergence forming between current blue and 6-month, the orange outlook employment components within the Dallas Fed. Former is now contracting while the latter is climbing. So again, the number of employees has fallen, but the employment forecast has gotten better. And it's a matter of, when do they get to that turning point, which continues to be fairly elusive. Dallas Fed Manufacturing Company outlook remains negative into contraction, fell to -17.5 with the number of employees -1. And that's where you can see why we look at so many different data points, why we try to look at so many different data sets, because each one's going to tell a story. It's going to tell a regional story. It's going to tell a story about one specific part of the supply chain and how that's all going to interact. And again, all of this really shows too that nothing is screaming expansion. We're seeing some things that are like, hey, this isn't contracting as bad. Hey, this is contracting a little bit faster. But the common thread in all of this is stagflation. You have a continuous move higher in pricing on the input side, and you still have a fairly weak and not really exciting expanding footprint. U.S. durable goods, January durable goods orders came in at negative 4.5% month on month versus the estimate of negative 4. Prior was a positive plus 5.1. Orders ex transportation. You can see again some of these different adjustments that we continue to see, but look at it. And the reason why we highlight this again versus the previous segment is because this ties into regional activity. Some regions may have been a little bit better, some a little bit worse. And that's where we're still at this elevated point. We're rolling, but we're still elevated. And that's why you get some of that mixed data points that can come out. Inventory growth has bounced back a bit, given 3-month annualized percent change in retail and inventories has ticked higher, nowhere near the recent peak. So for now, it's more of a return to the long-term trend. And as things get to the long-term trend, you're not going to have companies going out and buying inventory, trying to run in front of concerns about shipping. And that's where, again, you're going to get a little bit less of that lumpiness that we've seen in some of the GDP numbers. Consumer expectations for better business conditions in 6 months have rolled over sharply. Share is back down to what has at times been consistent with recessionary periods. Now, when you look at service spending, still running strong, 3-month annualized percent jump to plus 10% in January. Real personal spending in Jan, 1.1%. So you still are getting that balancing where people are spending way more on services, much less on the manufacturing and goods side. And that's something that is going to be persistent, but also a key driver to some of those inflationary pressures. Short-term trend of the 3-month annualized percent gain for wages and salary growth is picking back up. Great news for workers, but again, tougher for the Fed that is trying to tamp that down and keep wage pressure going down, because that is a problem for wage price spirals. The biggest thing that they're trying to avoid is a wage price spiral, which is why they're trying to drive down asset prices. But as we showed in segment 1, asset prices are remaining stickier. They stopped going up, but they haven't come down, and that is a concern. Inflation-adjusted U.S. income, excluding government transfers, rose to a record in Jan. So again, you're still seeing incomes going up. They're not keeping pace with inflation, but again, even adjusted for inflation, they're higher than they've ever been before. Consumer Sentiment Index from University of Michigan revised higher in February to 67 versus the estimate of 66.4. Again, current conditions revised down from 72.6 to 70. Expectations revised up slightly to 64. So again, you're seeing some of that balancing act, but then the conference board expectations came down to 69.7. And as we said, when there was a big disconnect where Michigan was much worse than the conference board metrics, we said, look, neither one is right. It's going to be somewhere in the middle that these will meet, and over time you see them converge, which is happening right now. Conference board consumer confidence was expected at 108.5, came in at 102.9. Present situation slightly better, but the expectations are deteriorating. Spread between expectations and present situation component within the consumer confidence index fell to negative 83.1 in Feb, lowest since March of 2001, as shown in the chart. Spread this negative historically consistent with recessions. Again, more of those pressure points that we've been talking about. Year-on-year percent change in median new single-family home came in at negative 0.7, worse since April 2020. Boom in pricing has certainly faded when looking at this metric, but in others, like when we talk about the S&P Core Logic, Case-Shiller, you're not seeing this. It's coming down, but still positive. So again, you haven't gone fully negative yet, which is what we showed in that first chart. Median price for new single-family home fell by 8.2% month-on-month in Jan, largest drop since September of 2014. Strong new home sales in January coming at 7.2% month-on-month versus the estimate of 0.7%. 7.2% in the prior month, revised up. Median new home price fell by 0.7, but still at 427,500. Month supply fell from 8.7 to 7.9. June to December 2022 period saw swift contraction in home prices based on the 6-month annualized. But again, it's just, you're not seeing that big drop. You're just seeing it kind of peter out. When you look at it annualized on a percentage basis, it looks great. But then you look at the number, it's like, until you get a meaningful drop, you're not going to see people feeling much relief. U.S. pending home sales came in at 8.1% versus the estimate of 1%. Best month since June 2020, with the West region leading, but a key leading indicator of the MBA purchase index is at the lowest level it's been at going back to 2014 and declining. So again, that's a key metric when you look at mortgages and mortgage rates. CRE asking rents are rolling over, but still positive. Apartment list national vacancy index starting to tick back up, but still not in a meaningful spot, which is why asking rents are still coming down, but still year on year going up. So they're just going up at a slower rate, which again leads to more pressure that we continue to see in the market. And all of this is inflationary. So essentially, like, what is this really saying? You're seeing a stabilizing in the market. And as we've said before, nothing goes down in a straight line. You're seeing some stabilization. You're seeing some pivoting, where on the manufacturing side, still contracting, but again, the pace has slowed a bit. Inflation's picking back up. On the housing front, inflation is still sticky, expanding at a slower pace, but still positive. And realistically, you're bouncing off some extreme lows on the housing front. So again, it's hard to continue at those extremes. You're getting that bounce, but we still see that fade just based on some of those key leading indicators. So that's what we have for you in the US. In the next segment, we're going to go deeper into Europe and some of the recent data sets that have come out showing some of that activity slowing as inflation accelerates once again.